A very good evening and welcome to all of you to this 26th webinar in our Wise Views Interactive Webinar Series. We wish you all a very happy Dasara. It's a very good evening and we have an amazing guest with us. Mr. Deenanath is going to speak about leadership and it is always against the headwinds as he coined it. Welcome Mr. Deenanath to this show and you are the 26th guest for us and we're extremely happy and delighted to present you to our audience. Most welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, what we will do is, today is a festival and we are quite aware of the ambient noise that is possible because most of you have logged in from homes as much as we have. And that shall continue, but we'll try and live with it. We'll try and minimize also. Please mute your mics and let's have greater focus. As I am speaking, you can hear some noise of crackers around me. Well, that's not me. There are lots of people around my apartment that are going, but I think the sound of the crackers has begun now. It will continue for a few more days. What I will do right now is I will take the pleasure of introducing our guest to you, and soon after that, we can have the talk being delivered by Mr. Deenanath. As I mentioned, it is called Wise Views, and these are leadership talks, and we have been hosting these conversations for the last 6 months. To be very precise, this is the 26th week, uninterrupted 26th week. And we thank all our distinguished leaders who have helped us put this together. Today, we have yet another distinguished leader. As I mentioned, he is going to talk about Against the Headwinds, Leadership is a Solo Ride. Mr. Deenanath Harapanahalli. Have I got it right, Mr. Deenanath?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. He is the founder and CEO of lifeCykul. And we'll know more about him. And as I said, the first 30 minutes will be a talk delivered by our guest, and the next 30 to 40 minutes will be Q&A moderated by our esteemed colleague, Professor R. Prasad and I. Let me take the pleasure of reading out this wonderful profile. Mr. Deena is an accomplished corporate leader, author, avid cyclist, and entrepreneur. lifeCykul's products help companies keep their employees engaged, active, fit, and energized. Mr. Deena is the creator of India's biggest and the most successful annual cycling events. It's very, very popular actually. Most notably, the Freedom Ride that has attracted more than 1 lakh participants so far. And all my friends who are cycling, they mention about him. They mention about this event. Before starting lifeCykul, Mr. Deena was the country head for Invesco in India. My friends who are working in Invesco have shared wonderful inputs about Mr. Deenanath. Prior to that, he held various corporate positions in the areas of M&A, private equity, strategy consulting, and financial services and technologies. Mr. Deenanath is a much sought after speaker, especially on real life lessons of leadership learned from the arena of sports, but they're applicable everywhere. I think today also we're going to talk about the leadership lessons that we have learned from the arena of sports and industry and various other walks of life. I'm sure Mr. Deena has structured a very good presentation for you today. You'll be very happy to know that Mr. Deenanath has an MBA in Finance and Strategy from the prestigious Carnegie Mellon University and a bachelor's degree in engineering from Karnataka University. With this brief introduction, I welcome Mr. Deenanath to start his talk. Ladies and gentlemen, I request all of you to mute your mics once again and let us enjoy the session. And before we start off, I want to tell Mr. Deenanath that today I did 60 kilometers of city ride on my cycle along with my friends. I'm a beginner. This is my 5th week. I just completed my 5th week and with an average speed of about 16 kilometers per hour and average distance of about 30 kilometers roughly per day. That's what I do. But today I touched 60. I went to Chavinar and come back. It's not easy, sir. But then I will hear from you more about it and some help for all of us. And more than that, lots of leadership lessons that we can draw from various activities like this. Over to you, Mr. Deenanath. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhakar and Professor Prasad and everybody. But before I begin, a very big namaskar to everyone and a very happy Dasara. I think we are doing this on a great day. And as you can see, I'm already been ordered to, dress for the occasion. So soon after this, I'm going to head out and, I wish, Sudhakar, I could do crackers, but I just didn't think it was possible. So I assumed there was a ban, but now I'm going to hunt for some. Okay. Before I will share my screen, I have a very small presentation. And Sudhakar was very kind enough in the introduction, and he mentioned there are many leadership lessons, but my intention is to maybe share one or two views I have. So I don't have too many slides, and I don't think I have too many lofty points. And Sudhakar, before I begin, just confirm if you're seeing a white screen and I'm audible.
Yes, white screen is available. Yeah.
Okay, that was my empty slide to start. I'm in a different business than the one I started when I started Cycle. Now my business is lifeCykul, and I'll tell a little bit about that just so I put in context. Then I try to do a number of things in my cycling business avatar, if you will, right? And Sudhakar mentioned about the cycling events, the Freedom Ride, and on every important national occasion, we have had a concept ride, Freedom Ride on the August 15th, as you can imagine, Republic Ride on January 26th, Peace Ride on October 2nd. We have a Unity Ride on October 31st that actually culminates in the Statue of Unity near Vadodara. So, number of cycling events. That was my early foray into being an entrepreneur, starting something about cycling in India. But my primary business was to set up what we called then as the cycle stations. These would be the centers in an urban area where people could actually take cycles from, right to the destination, leave it there. There's enough technology that goes behind that. There is a whole lot of logistical operations. Then I'll tell you a little bit about what I did on that one. Along the way, I think, like many other entrepreneurs, or almost all of them, I was crazy enough to start these 3 other businesses that didn't do very well, by the way. And then around 2 years ago, in fact, exactly 2 years ago, I reached a point where I felt that I actually had to do a different business, because cycling, to the extent that I could bring it to in this country, given everything else, the state of infrastructure, the structure of contracts that we can do here, etc. So as a business, there may be a different time for it. So I closed that and I started my lifeCykul business, which is essentially a tech company that provides a platform for employee engagement. And we're doing a whole lot of sports-related things there. And then as a sign-off thing from my cycling business, I actually started a cycling park, and I'll show you a video on that one. But net, what I'm going to tell you, the point of this slide is that I don't come from a high point view and tell you that I know everything about leadership. Honestly, I don't. Along the way, I think I've been as attentive as I can be and pick up a few important lessons. I will be very happy to share, and I'll be very happy for many of you to come back and share your views on that, even if they're absolutely opposite to mine. I'm very happy to have that conversation. But I think one thing is true. Whether cycling events, they were spectacularly successful as physical events. When I started, actually, it was a very small 200 people event, Freedom Ride in Novotel. So we wanted everything to be 5-star about our Independence Day. And that was 2009. And then it became so big that we actually couldn't hold it in Novotel. So I had to shift it to Gachibowli Stadium. And then became so big that we couldn't physically possibly handle it. So we have now actually moved to a digital platform, which actually runs on lifeCykul. So I'm very happy about how cycling events have been, and I can, for my own sake, I can call them a success, but I think there's a lot to do still in terms of that. And Sudhakar, I'm extremely happy to hear about your 60K ride. You're there. So you're not a beginner anymore. Every practitioner cyclist is, is very dear to me as a concept, as a person. So I like that. And by the way, the first Freedom Ride was a 62-kilometer event. And that was to signify the 62 years of freedom in 2009. And then we kept implementing it until, somebody came and said, these kilometers are sounding actually very small right now. And that's how the cycling culture grew in India. And then we made it a 100-kilometer ride. And now it happens virtually on the digital platform. Cycle stations, I grew it to about 3,000 cycles in 4 cities, Hyderabad, Gurgaon, Jaipur, and Ujjain. And please don't question the business acumen of choice of those cities. Those are just the contracts that we could win from the city governments, smart city authorities, etc. After that, I actually decided that that's really isn't the right business model for India. We still have a lot to do in terms of getting a safe infrastructure for cyclists to ride on. Seasoned cyclists who are used to it can actually cycle on the road. but many people who are doing it for a livelihood, they're going from point A to point B, need to be given a much safer environment. So, and there were 2 or 3 other things that actually made me believe that now is not the time to push that business right now in terms of practicing cyclists for mobility. The right thing to do is to step back and look at what can be done in developing the infrastructure first. A safe environment for pedestrians, a safe environment for cyclists, and in fact, a safe environment for motorists. Every developed nation has that. In India needs that. And clinics was an interesting business. I actually bought a truck and equipped that as a mobile cycle service station. And that would go from place to place and primarily apartment communities and all that, and would fix cycles. And if you look at it right now, the number one reason why kids don't cycle is because they're not in a good condition. And it's not easy for people living in an urban setup to go out and get those cycles serviced. So I thought it was an extremely valuable service. But again, when we actually serviced more than I would say 25,000 cycles in that, then I studied that very closely and said, now is not the time for this either. So that was closed. Magazine and retail, you can imagine, with the advent of online platforms, nobody reads magazine like they used to do before. It all has to be digital content, which in fact I have revived that on my lifeCykul platform. Retail, I did not want to get into that as a business, but again, so much of that has actually gone on to the online world. It's amazing how much India has advanced just in the last 10 years. And if you can, I strongly encourage all of you to take a look at one of those infographics that is actually available on web. You can look it up. Probably came from a visual capitalist or somebody. How the digital payments in India have grown. Just from 2014, India, from a place that was nowhere on the chart, has come to be the #1 country in the world. And that actually, while my business may have failed, I'm very happy that the environment actually progressed. So the digital environments are very quick to progress in India, not as much as the physical environments are not as fast, but that's okay. And I'll show you the one that I'm actually very proud of. So before I closed on the cycling business, I decided I want to do something that would be satisfying for me more than anything else. So I consolidated the 3,000 cycles, got rid of many of them because they were aged enough to be, liquidated, and then took about 1,000 cycles and put them up in a park that we developed with the help of the forest department called Palapita Cycling Park. You can see that the link is there, and I hope somebody can actually copy that and paste that in the chat. Maybe I will do that during the Q&A, and you can go there and see it. Palapita is Telangana state bird, so forest department wanted to name it that way. So it's about 46-acre reserve forest that is right opposite to Botanical Garden in Kondapur. And it's a traffic-free, safe, naturally beautiful area. There are about 1,000 peacocks there. There is a lake there. It's a fantastic place for kids to learn cycling, families to cycle, people to just, put on an audiobook in their headphones and go around cycling. It's a 3-kilometer cycling track that we developed. So if you don't mind, I can play that video. This is about 2.5-3 minutes, I think, if I remember correctly. And then
please go ahead.
So the rest of the presentation for me would be not more than 15 minutes, maybe, just to take you through a couple of things that I learned along the way. All right. So let me click on this video.
Hyderabad is characterized by the rich cultural heritage and modern infrastructure. Expanding employment opportunities through rapid urbanization and providing better standards of the need for building ecologically resilient state, and launched a flagship program called Harita Haram. Has come up with a unique concept of transforming a dump yard into an urban forest park completely dedicated to cycling. This park is named after the Telangana state bird as Palapita Cycling Park. Cycle, India's leading public bike sharing company.
This is a great transformation story in and of itself for the park. This used to be an informal dumping yard for many around here. So on one side we used to find construction debris earlier. On the other side, we used to find all the residential trash thrown around. It took years of hard work to clean all that out, make this what it is. It's actually an urban forest, it's a reserve forest. It's back to its life.
The park offers mud terrain cycle track to the extent of 3 kilometers. That includes a peripheral track around the park, exclusive crisscross cycling track for children and learners. The tracks give a sense of adventure and buzz while you are coasting down slopes and balancing on the road curves.
This has been one of the very good experiences cycling over here, and I really love the whole atmosphere.
Just a really nice weather. You get to choose any kind of cycle you want to, and any kind of helmet and any kind of path you want to choose. You can go in the long cut or you can come in the shortcuts.
This is really wonderful place. It really gives a meditating feeling, and I get recharged just before going home and after work.
It's just a feel over here. The cycling track is awesome. Every city should have one. Happy cycling!
It has helped in building a cycling culture among the residents, IT employees, women and children. Palapitta Cycling Park is a shining example of a trash to treasure project.
Okay, so, in the end, right, I mean, if I had to summarize, the result of whatever that might have happened in my, the cycle business, as I started the life cycle. And if you want to relate to some of the cycle sporting scenarios, and of course we can talk for hours just on the cycling as a sport, which by the way, India has been doing very, very well. In the short span of last 10 years that I have been, doing a few things here, the progress has been amazing. But as I want to say, as in cycling, so in career and life, we really don't have opponents. It is me. I need to ultimately look at me and decide my next course. And it's not really the competition that matters. Right? The competition is inside. I don't want to sound unnecessarily profound, but as we go along, hopefully a few of those points will be very, simply relatable to many of you. So this is something that I used to find, even back in my corporate career, very amusing, but also bothersome many, many times. So many of the juniors in the company would come up, and sometimes they would have a big heartburn that they're not progressing as fast as they would have liked. And, and they wanted to have a talk, whether they had it with me or, their business managers or HR managers. The theme would be something like this. It is in their voice. I can be a leader. I got all these attributes. I will be a leader because I got the motivation. And guess what? I'm already one, right? However, this is the rider. As long as you will guarantee my success, you declare me a leader, then I'll go bark orders on a team that you assign me and I'll get the work done. You declare me a leader and give me unlimited resources and I'll make some things happen. Unfortunately, the real world doesn't work like that. I don't think that the point that I used to always mention to my, teammates is, someone else can make you a manager, but nobody can make you a leader. Ultimately, you'll have to find that spot of leadership that is uniquely personal to every single individual. And then you go out and start making things happen. And everybody, trust me, there may be, 7+ billion people in this world. And, for good or bad, not all 7 billion are leaders, but those who are, let's say, whatever a small percentage is, every one of them has an individual stamp on it. And that, I think, is the hallmark of leadership. It's a very individual process. It's something that people have to evolve, bring out. And that's really the point of my rest of the presentation. And I want to, maybe call it the play of words, but to me, this is critical. I hear a lot about inspiring leaders and how people want to come out, be a leader and inspire others. In fact, you see these days, especially with, social media advent, etc., So many people say, I'm taking this up to inspire others. And honestly, I find this very amusing. And I also want you guys to pause a little bit. Of course, most of you already know this, but what is it that I might be hinting at here as to what the difference is between inspiring and inspired leaders? And for me to make a bold declaration here, in my opinion, there are no inspiring leaders. There are only inspired leaders. Now, some of those inspired leaders are so fired up about their goal, about the motivation, about what they want to do in life, what change they want to bring about in wherever they're working. That method, that approach, that intensity is so extraordinary that we find them inspiring. I don't think they ever care about whether they're inspiring somebody or not. So the real people that we define as inspiring leaders are essentially those who are actually inspired themselves to a point of an exceptional performance, to an extraordinary behavior that becomes inspiring for others. So I want you to keep that in mind as a very fine line of difference between the two words. And just to, and maybe partly it may sound dramatic, but I do believe there are no leaders who start out with a goal of inspiring others. There are no inspiring leaders. They start out with a goal to achieve. And that method, that approach, that intensity is what inspires others. So they're only inspired leaders. And the other way to look at it is leaders who are not inspired themselves to do something extraordinary can never be inspiring. People find them so ordinary that there is no inspiration there going out. Very quickly, a few other, this slide has some, animation, so bear with me. In the corporate world, right? So we had a very intense approach to finding out what defines a competency, who is competent, why are we not having certain business results, what behavior is driving, what behavior is not driving, what change we want. This is an everyday exercise. In fact, one of the lines that I used to tell everybody in my company is HR is too important to be left to HR alone. So everybody has to play a role in making the most out of the human capital we got. And one, that is absolutely the right thing to do from a business perspective. Second, it's a duty that every manager has. And without that goal, a manager can never be a leader. So when people move from, and incompetence, a state of incompetence is not absolute, right? It is relative. A person who is very competent at some level may be incompetent at the next level. So as people go from being incompetent to competent, so what is it that plays along? Right? There are forces that push them up, there are forces that push them down. And a lot of these are inside a person. So what pushes people up? That motivation to do well, go to the next level, that aspiration to be someone better tomorrow, today. The discipline of going through whatever it takes to get there. And the focus on developing himself or herself so that they're really not incompetent when they get to that next level. And what pulls people back? The other way is also true, right? Somebody may already be up there, but maybe sliding backwards. Why? Not motivated, are finding some constraints too big to be surmounting. Too much of opposition, and in corporate world that could be politics, that could be relationship matters, that could be anything, right? So these are the positive and the negative forces that take people from an incompetent state to competent and vice versa. And then what comes next? Now, if you really want to find the next, sorry, going the other way, people who perform in an inspired state, they're not just competent. They are up there. And even the competent people actually look at them and wonder, wow, how does a person do it, right? And what makes that happen, right? That's the inspiration. And that is for that person, not for others. If something inspired a person, another person is not going to be at a higher level of performance. It is that person who's inspired. Hence, I say, these are the inspired leaders. They're not inspiring. We may find them inspiring, right? Then what happens? Right? So sometimes it's as easy as it is for a competent person to slide back to incompetency. It is equally easy for an inspired person to lose that motivation, that higher level of drive, and slide backwards. But the reality of the world, and I think if you start observing real cases around you, you can relate to this. The disillusionment that actually pulls the inspired people back just doesn't take them one step back. It actually takes them all the way back. So the moment an inspired person becomes disillusioned with something that is a hardship along the way, is not one step back. They will go from being an inspired person to an incompetent person. And this is one of the reasons I believe psychologically, we humans are wired not to take as much of a risk as otherwise we're capable of actually. What holds us back is, look, we intuitively know that I am fired up by an idea today. But if I put a step forward there, for me, a step backward is not one step. It's many, many, many steps. I lose everything I got today. Then I have to start from a much worse off situation than I'm in today. So hopefully this makes sense. If you're answering the question as to why people, very, very competent ones, people who are absolutely capable of getting to that extraordinary level of performance at an inspired state, why so many of them don't take that step is this fear. This is innate. It is in our genes. It is in our DNA. We have been, right from the animal state, our brain has been wired to say, look, calculate the cost of that elevated level of adventure, because if that fails, you're not just going back to a safety net. You may fall off a cliff, right? That's the psychological aspect that I believe in. I'm very happy to have a debate and a discussion around it. Now, so back to that point about headwind, right? So what are the headwinds? So these are the leadership headwinds. There are constraints, there are disconnects. I want to do something, someone else want to do something else. There is demotivation. I felt if I did this, my company is going to be unicorn in a year, and I was going to retire rich and whatnot. But if it is not happening, right, that is highly demotivating. Disillusionment, no matter what you do. And this is what I fought when I wanted to end my cycling business. I did not want to tell a story of a loss or a failure to anybody. It is a failure if you look at it from a business standpoint. Otherwise, why would I shut it down? But I did not want to shut it down without something of value. And I'll tell you, it's actually, Sudhakar, you picked a perfect day, and I'll tell you why. I wanted to tell this story at the beginning of the presentation, but then the context wouldn't have been there. So I actually went to the park this morning. I did my ride, and Sudhakar, actually, you should feel very proud because I did only 25 today. And I came back, I had my coffee, then I thought I'll just go check the park a little bit. So I drove there, and there was a little boy, no more than 7 or 8 years old, standing just at the gate, just on the road near the gate, and signaling that, he wanted help to get in. It costs money to go to the park, right? So what KBR is for walking, Palapita is for cycling. So even for kids, it costs 25 rupees to go in and cycle. And this little kid wants to cycle. And by nature, I'm tuned to ignore anybody who's begging for anything. So I just moved past almost as if not noticing. I got my work done inside there, only 15-20 minutes. I was coming out, that kid was still standing there. So I asked the security guard, what is it that kid wants? And the security guard tells me, oh, sir, he wants to go in, cycle, he doesn't have money. Then I looked at myself and I said, you know what kind of a cyclist am I, number one? And why did I even to take this much of trouble to create this park if a little kid who doesn't have money to go in and cycle? He's not begging for money. He's not begging for food. He's begging to go in and cycle. And somebody, somebody who can actually let him in, he hopes, would actually intervene and let him in. And, my engineering college days came back to me, my memory is flushing, because I actually went, I was in electronics and I wanted to learn programming. So I walked up to my head of the department and said, you know what, this summer, I want to learn programming myself. So why don't you let me into the computer center? Those are the days where computer centers were monoliths, one building, one big block, and air conditioned, you have to leave your shoes outside, all that nonsense, right? So the guy looks at me and says, well, it will cost you. And I didn't know what to say. Fortunately, he didn't charge me, but I think he was testing me. And he said, go in and write a letter to me, I'll approve, go in, we'll see what you do, and then there will be a nominal cost. I took the chance. I went in there, and I don't think I would have been here today if that guy had not let me in. So I let the kid in, and I think he went in cycle. I went and told my guys to let him in. He cycled. So I feel that what would have been a disillusionment for me to close down my cycling business, I think came back to me many, many times in terms of my own value for having created an asset like that. So I will then get to the next part of it. Headwind in my parlance of the cycling world is, these are all the constraints. They're highly demotivating. There are people factors, there are environmentals, there are infrastructure issues, there are governmental issues, there are societal issues. It's it is bound to happen. And honestly, it's good that it happens, because if people didn't know how to overcome those, it really would be a very incompetent state for somebody to go to the next stage and trying to do something. So it's almost impossible to, fight or dodge the headwind and still expect to win. You can fight the headwind. Those who are headstrong, bang their head against a stone wall. Yes, you can fight it. And we see many people doing that, right? Many times, many people tell me that I do it. We can dodge it. And this is the corporate world, right? People play all kinds of sidestepping and politics and realignments and whatnot. And you can dodge and you can get along with the system and be in a reasonably nice situation. But other than that, you really can't fight it, right? So you'll have to harness it. So, and that I think is a hallmark of leadership. The people who look at the exact same constraints that everyone else has, but won't be bogged down, not in a sort of a blind faith, a very stupid bravery, but an extremely insightful way to navigate through that process and come out having achieved something that's of value, if not for the world, for themselves, if not for everybody, for the little cyclist out there, right? So, but how do you do it? In practical sense, it's easy to relate to this. If you have an engine, next time when you're on a flight, observe this. Aeroplanes are built to handle headwinds. Back in the days of wind-powered boats, sails were engineered to maneuver through a headwind. And actually, it might find extremely interesting, right? You can actually steer a boat into a wind and still move forward. You would expect that the wind will actually push back. And wind can be extremely powerful, by the way. You'll experience it if you're a cyclist. It can actually hold you back quite a bit. So in leadership, much like in a cycle ride, the important point to remember is there's no one else. You're the driver. And this is why I love cycling, right? Look at any other automobile. You have an engine. If it's a multi-user vehicle, there's a driver and you're being driven, right? So when you're cycling, there is no engine. You're the engine. There is no driver. You're the driver. And if you're doing a solo ride, you are the passenger. So that is a perfect balance in my mind. But the rest of the topics we can take up during the discussion. But I will, end the presentation here. It is a solo ride, in my opinion. The leadership is a very enjoyable ride. So do enjoy. So, over to you, Professor Prasad and Sudhakar.
Yes.
Next.
Mr. Deenanath, this has been a very interesting, sharp and pinpointed presentation on this day. We couldn't have asked for a better presentation on Vijayadashmi or Dasara as the context is. I think those motivated little cyclists are there in all of us. And we need Mr. Deenanath to actually allow them inside the park to cycle, figuratively knocking at the doors of various available opportunities, but the gatekeepers don't allow us to do, both in life, in society, as well as within organizations. I think it's a very, very interesting and profound way of telling those stories, to start with the story of the little boy, and then defining the framework of the leadership in your own words. You put it very interestingly that there is no one who's going to come and declare you as a leader and keep all the resources for you to, make do with those available resources. It's not. So I think that framework was also very clearly understood. I'm very, very thankful that you did that. And many a time, while listening to your talk, as well as looking at the points on the slide, I felt that many more questions will come now. So what I suggest is that the viewers and the participants can actually key in their questions while the conversation is on. We'll pick up those questions as well. We already have quite a few questions, but still we will see. If you have not already sent your question, you can even key in now, and we will pick those questions. The other thing is, of course, there is no leader who is not actually inspired, can inspire others. That's another telling tale of the inside story of leadership. I think that we need to understand. We all have to be inspired. We all need to have the drive. And then very nicely you put that how we can move from a state of incompetence to competence with some motivation. And the reverse journey or the slippery slope is also equally dangerous. You will have demotivation, you will get disillusioned. Even those who are inspired can actually fall into the state of incompetence. And that's very, very profound. So thank you very much for building this Palapitta cycle park. And I think it was worth doing it in a city like this. I'm sure many cities in this country are not cycle bandhu kind of cities, especially in India. I think we need to have a lot to be done in the infrastructure area, as you mentioned. It's not safe yet. I sometimes take all kinds of routes, but I find it extremely panicky sometimes when a big vehicle is passing by me. I still feel that. I have all the gear and I have all the team members who are along with me, but still I get that shiver when a big bus or an RTC bus passes by me with a hissing sound of it going to stop just next to me. I guess safety is a very, very big issue. Thank you very much for bringing out all those things. And ladies and gentlemen, very nice point. I'm not going to read out all the points. I think those points will come. But one point last from my side is that the competition is within you, within me, more than the competition being outside. So with those remarks, what I will do now is that you will enjoy this conversation, I can guarantee you, ladies and gentlemen. So keep sharing your questions on the chat. I will now bring in Professor R. Prasad. Professor R. Prasad is my esteemed colleague. He's got a brilliant academic track record. He's studied engineering from IIT Bombay and management from IIM Calcutta. He has about 3 years of work experience, both as an entrepreneur and corporate life, and also academics. Here at ICFAI Group, he's the director for academic wing, and he's the architect of the latest program that we have launched. It's called Online MBA program. It's been recently ranked as #2 in the country, very, very close to #1 actually. But I'm sure with his efforts, dynamism, and vision, we are going to rank our Online MBA program as #1 in the next round of rankings that might come up. Careers 360, a prestigious organization, has looked at the data and looked at the platform and the value that we are giving to the students. It's very, very recently launched. It's not even 6 months. So they ranked as #2, and we're extremely happy for that. And the credit goes to Professor R. Prasad. And Professor Prasad was an entrepreneur himself before getting into the professional world. As I mentioned, he is going to steer the question and answer sessions. The first cluster will be moderated by Professor Prasad, and then we alternate. So the questions that we have gathered are very interesting, and we clustered into 4 sections. And so one cluster will be taken by Professor Prasad and the next by me, and then we take turns like that. So may I now request Professor Prasad to start the moderation. Over to you, Professor Prasad, and thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sudhakar Rao. First of all, let me thank all the participants for having joined in on a holiday. As per our philosophy, a holiday is a very, very good, and that too such a holiday is a very, very good opportunity to learn something different, something new, and which normally doesn't happen in a very, very busy day. You're tired by the end of the day. So thanks to all the participants for having joined in. This is the first thing. Second is, from what I've heard in the presentation, I think it's very apt. It is, Dashahera. So the connection is very clear. It's about, overcoming the dashas in you, the hara on the dasha. And I think a lot of points have come in the presentation, and it's a very, very apt day to have brought in this kind of a session. This is the second point. And the third point is, I think, though it's from a practitioner, it also connects to how leadership is defined. And you have all these components which go in there. You have the influence part, you have the goal part, you have the team part. And I think there is a certain order which has been given here in terms of how others can get inspired, and that won't happen unless the leader himself is inspired, and that the leader has got a goal, and that there is certainly is an achievement orientation in the leader. And I think together it puts things together. I think it's very clear how this thing can be also practiced, that it has to start from the self. So with that, I'll now get into the first cluster of questions. And I think we have a wonderful personality here, because I think very, very transparently, he's also brought out what has worked and what has not worked. And I think both this inspiration and the disillusionment part can very, very clearly be discussed, because I think these are cycles that all of us go through. It's very, very important to know how you will get out of disillusionment, just as much as you want to know how to succeed. So here comes the first question. Mr. Deenanath, you have been for long in the corporate world, and how did you shift out? What was the source of the inspiration in this?
Yeah. So, long story short, Professor Prasad, I spent 15 plus years outside India, and then I came back in the corporate realm to set up an India presence for the company I was working at that time. And honestly, India had changed. In fact, I'll give you a couple of examples. When we all get into a time warp, right? So when I left, what was India to me? That was the India that I expected when I came back. And after having been exposed to this lesson in my review, I was actually on a trip in Netherlands, and I was driving and I put on the radio, and I suddenly started hearing Ram Bhajan on the FM radio. And I said, this is Netherlands, and I'm hearing this. And this was just Hindi. I mean, it was something that I could have described as a Tulsidas Hindi, not like, what is spoken today. So I actually got a little surprised, and I had, a few Indian friends there later, a couple of days later, asked, what is this? Are there Hindi channels in Netherlands? What is this? Then they actually told me, no, this is a fascinating story. You should understand this. There were, in 1800s, right, is as far back as that, there were sugarcane laborers who were taken out from Bihar and UP and a Hindi-speaking belt from India to the Caribbeans. And they became the sugarcane farmers there. And they're pretty much, I hope their life was a little better than the other slavery, environments. But, and one of those, Caribbean countries was Suriname. And while many were British colonies, Suriname was a Dutch colony. So when Suriname got its independence, Netherlands said, if you're a Suriname resident or a citizen, you could migrate to Netherlands. And many of those, earlier were Indians, they moved to Suriname, and then they ultimately moved to Netherlands for better career opportunities. They kept their culture intact. And it was as if they were still in 1800s as far as back their Hindi went, their, cultural practices went. And, so long story short, maybe not that short, to answer your question. So what actually prompted me was I came and I had this advantage of an outsider's view in India. And then, of course, I got my job done. I had to set up the India business, and that took me several years. I got that done, and I believe it's a very successful establishment. The company achieved every single thing they wanted to achieve. And there was time for me to think, what is it that I wanted to do next? And then even now I am, and at that time I was even more, just fascinated about the possibilities in New India. I don't think there's any other place on earth today that has as many opportunities. And shame on me that I could not get my, dream of putting cycles all over the urban India set up. But that is not, the system's failure. That is, my failure to get it running the way it needs to be run, right? A few of them I could. Taking it to 3,000 cycles, wasn't small, but it wasn't, as big as it needs to be. So that is what prompted me. If I look around even now, just as I did then, the opportunities to bring a change here in India, to build a successful business, to do things that are absolutely extraordinary, is just immense. And I'll give you one data point. So after I closed on the cycling business, I actually started lifeCykul. In fact, I came back that day to my team and I said, guys, we need to put life into this company, right? So cycle became lifeCykul. And I didn't want to change too much of the branding, and just because we didn't want to spend money on it. And we started. And my only point to my team was, there were businesses where companies were willing to pay a lot more than what we were asking them, even for the normal cycling business. So I took all that and I recrafted the business and did it. And just in June this year, we did a virtual digital event on our platform, an employee engagement event called Surathon. So this was an International Yoga Day event and Surya Namaskar Marathon. 23,000 people participated, right? And everything virtual, everything digital. That means the Surya Namaskar is real. So people, were in their homes doing whatever number of Surya Namaskars they were doing, but the tracking, the recording, the reporting, the engagement of the people, this is world class, right? So I do believe, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So India has so many opportunities right now for people to jump in and, bring in a change, do things, build very, very rewarding businesses and, practices for themselves. So that's what motivated me. So I hope, it was a long-winded answer, but I hope you got the answer.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think from the Ram Bhajan to the Suryathon, I think you connected. You connected that there is a context, and that context is very specific to us. You connected to the Ram Bhajan and something else triggered.
Yeah.
And I think finally it led to the Suryathon where you got amazing numbers. And I think that kinds of shows up what all can be done. And it's a great thing that something like this happens, and it shows so many of us about the potential which exists around us and within us. The next question is about, it's about the word headwinds. And it's also connected to the word solo ride. So I'll combine two questions here, one of which has appeared in the chat box. The first question is regarding the headwinds. The more one allows the headwinds to batter and bash up our cherished and often uninterrogated ways of seeing people. This is exactly as the question is answered. It's well crafted, so I'm repeating it. The more one allows the headwinds to batter and bash up our cherished and often uninterrogated ways of seeing people, places and things, the better as leaders we emerge. Therefore, how does one define, make sense of headwinds? Can you explain this with reference to your journey in specific? Also, I think there's a question which comes on the solo ride part that in an organizational context, there are team members and the manager has to lead the team. So how do we call it a solo ride? How do you connect it to the solo ride? So I think I'm putting both of these together.
Right. Okay. Yeah, let me answer the first one, the headwind. Absolutely right. We can't let these things come in our way, but I'll give you, before even the business parlance, I'll give you the actual cycling scenario, which is so apt for us. And, when you're cycling, you essentially have three forces working against you. Okay. One is a road friction. Second is the elevation. So let's say, you're going to cycle and you see this hill up on the horizon, and you have to go on that. And trust me, these hills look so big when you look from a cyclist viewpoint, and you have to climb up, right? So it's very nerve-wracking, it's very intimidating. And that's a second force, the gravity, right? The elevation that comes up like a hill in front of you, like a wall in front of you. So road friction, elevation. And the third is the wind. Okay. And believe it or not, no mountain is high enough. And no road friction is that hard that you can't conquer, whether technology or practices. But the only force that decides a winner and a loser in a race is the wind. And I strongly encourage all of you to Google up those videos where they show how winning cyclists harness the wind, not just be beaten by it. Like you said, battered and bashed up and all that, right? So the point of that is there are strategies there to beat no matter what the headwind brings onto you. And the most invisible and the most potent force against a cyclist is the wind. Not a mountain, not a road friction, not your equipment, it is the wind. So how do you beat that? And every time when you see people beat it in race after race after race, then we know for a fact that much like in cycling, in business, in our life, these forces are there, undeniable. They are unseen, but they're undeniable. They're very powerful. But it is possible, but it takes enormous amount of creativity, okay? Enormous amount of teamwork, and that is a segue for your next question. How do you then call it a solo ride? No, cycling race is not a solo event, it's actually a team event. You do need people who cover you from those winds at the right time in the right place so that you can actually win, right? But why is it a solo ride? Is who is going to tell who will shield you from the wind? If there are those egoistic cyclists who say, I need to win, so you take the wind for me. And it's an everyday conversation among cycling races, by the way, cycling, athletes who go out and race, right? So the people who force others to take the wind for them will never win a race. Those athletes who inspire their teammates and get one of their teammates to say, man, I will cover you here. and you go ahead. And another guy comes and says, I will cover you here. Then you go ahead. Because every one of them know that they as a team can win when they play their role in the leader winning. And the leader is not getting that status by saying that it is his place to, do it, by demonstrating. What demonstrates that? The sheer amount of hard work. The amount of data cyclists collect is unbelievable. Same way even in business, right? So it is very, very apparent to people that who is the guy who is waking up before everyone, and who is the guy who is going to sleep after everyone, who is that guy who is working the hardest, and who is that guy who is working for others. Let's say I see a team member struggle today. Then I step back, I take the time to find out why that guy is struggling. Then I have that conversation with him and work with him to say, this is the way to overcome. And when that guy does it and overcomes, knows for a fact that you're there as a leader for him, not for yourself. That is the solo ride. Nobody's going to give you that insight to say, how do you make others win? A leader's, goal of making his teammates win is a solo ride. The win is a team event.
I think that's very, very wonderfully put. I think it brilliantly answers the question put on the teamwork, because this has happened. This happens in organizational context. When you have a crisis and you have a goal to meet, I think there are people who step in and support you. And that happens, and they do it very willingly. And those who do it are the ones who have something in them to become leaders.
And if I just can extend the answer, if the manager has an attitude, right, going into a crisis meeting, saying that no matter what comes out of this particular crisis, let it not stick to me, right? These guys are politicians first, leaders next, right? And that attitude, even a fifth grader can point out. They think going in that nobody will find that out. But if they're going into a crisis with a mindset, my first and foremost mandate is to cover myself. This is scenario A. There's a scenario B. No matter what happens to me, I will pull all of us out of this crisis. I'm not going to leave anything undone until we are out of this crisis. That is equally visible to a fifth grader, right? Now, that is what distinguishes the leader from the ordinary, right? So when you put yourself first, right, it's very easy for people to, and by the way, generations are getting smarter. This could have been done 50 years ago by a shrewd guy, somewhat being unnoticed in the mix. Now, everybody's smart. So smartness is no longer the problem. Leadership is the problem.
I think this taking of accountability and putting yourself at risk first,
yes,
is the hallmark of a leader. And I think that very, very well stands out for people who do that. And for people who are not willing to take that on, also it stands out, as you very well said. People are equally smart. I think it's generating into a very wonderful conversation, and there are a lot of things which can be actioned in terms of how we look at ourselves in this conversation. Let me move to the next question. Women in leadership. How can we facilitate more women in leadership? Because by definition, they take risks. And you see that happening, without rewards, without apparent rewards, which is as defined by corporate life. So how do we get more women to kind of, solve all the problems that we have much more than what organizations are currently doing?
Yeah, okay. I have a very simple philosophy on this, right? We men think that we somehow have to do something to make women leaders, okay? And there's only one thing we need to do, right? Just get out of the way. Right? See, leaders are leaders, whether they're men or women, they're children or adults. Leaders are leaders. They will find their way. Now, what happens? We have systemic issues. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there's no challenge in that process. There are many challenges in that process. Most of them have to do with how we have structured our work and life, right? And when some of that changes, and technology will help the higher effort in restructuring the work. For example, now I believe work from home has opened up the opportunity for so many women to just step up and do things, right? Otherwise, they needed to be homebound when they were expected to be at work. Let's say if our work and life was structured that way, they're at work, where they wanted to be, if that was the context. So I think, the world has changed. I don't think we really need to do too many things in empowering women. They're already empowered. They were always empowered. We just had built, a social context, a industry infrastructure, the way we put up our offices, the way we handle transportation, the way we handle the home front responsibilities, those were coming in the way. And I think technology has sorted that out. Now people can be anywhere and be productive. And I think, see, some of these changes, they're not linear, right? I think the women in 90s in India especially might have struggled to come up to the corporate career. Then the following decade was that much easier, and now the following decade was even easier. Now the coming decade, I think if anything, you need to just make sure that those women are not running over the men, in their momentum, right? So I say it in a very positive way. I think the world has changed. When I get a lot of these, we're a startup, right? So we can't really shell out a whole lot of money and bring these very senior, experienced people to work for us. We need to get those, young kids to come and work in an inspired way in what we're doing. So when I hire a number of these, I put them in a room and I have this conversation with them. And if they are men, I tell them this, right? And I'll tell this to everybody very openly. If you're a 25-year-old now, okay, be careful and be careful how you're building your career and how much you're putting in your career growth. Because when you're 35, right, you'll have a boss who is 25, okay? And most likely that will be a woman. I mean, not that it's a bad thing, it's a good thing, right? But let it not be a result of your inaction. If you find that acceptable, today, go ahead. But when you're 35, when you have a boss who is 25 and that's a woman, then don't come and complain to me, how did this happen? Don't expect your promotion to come just because you're 10 years older. And don't expect your promotion to come just because you're a guy and you can spend 2 extra hours in the office, right? So I think it's changing. And I see this happening, by the way. I see everywhere I go, I see women just taking charge and doing it. We do have one thing that and I said this in the beginning. We need to be very conscious on how we are getting involved. If you're getting involved in a sort of hey, I know the solution, so let me tell you, we're repeating the mistake. But if you're getting into a conversation saying the world has changed, okay, let's collectively figure out how this has changed, right? And let's collectively figure out what can come in the way of anybody, not just women, women, men, kids, right? So then I think India is going to see very soon such a huge productivity boost, among women. It's going to see so many leaders emerge very naturally, okay? And my only fear is that we take away that success from them by making it somehow look like non-merit oriented. I think I'm a big believer in meritocracy, right? Anybody who possesses the merit, let them come up, and you will naturally find that many, many, many more women will come up than even otherwise. In fact, if we start saying a quota system, promote women just because they're women, honestly, it's the biggest injustice we can do to women, because we are starting with an assumption that by themselves, they cannot come forward.
Absolutely. I think I am 200% on this with you. And I'm a firm believer of, this getting out of the way business. And what I think that you've said about the pandemic having facilitated and, in a way structuring work and life for women is absolutely true. Absolutely true. And I think this gives all of us a lot of opportunity. And I also feel that this, you mentioned it in one way. I'm putting a different perspective on it. And this is, the Shiva who's being trampled upon by Gauri. I think, getting run down should not, this the ego business, when this momentum gathers, there will certainly be some trampling. And I think, we need to get ready to get trampled upon. And I think that is also part of that solo ride and part of that, the me versus me kind of thing. And I think if you really want to succeed with given the kind of environment, startups, not too much money, you need people, you need women getting involved, they can do far better. I think that is also an integral part of the journey. You should get ready to get trampled upon. Somebody who's far more competent, and then believe me, there are enough women around who are very, very competent. Personal experience. I come to the last question in this cluster, and this is about, this I'm connecting to technology. I mean, the shift that you made when you came out of cycle into life cycle in some fashion. And this is a very overview kind of a question. What are the various types of interventions that technology has made in sports, and what kind of market opportunity do you think? This is for the viewers who'd like to get into that.
Yeah. Oh, that's it's a fascinating field. Second, it is extremely fast evolving, and data is coming from places that you have never thought of before, right? And I'll give you about maybe 3 examples. If you want to know with what speed, PV Sindhu smashes a badminton shot, right? Earlier, this was a technology that was available in sophisticated arenas where they put cameras and radars and track them, okay? Now it's a little sensor that you can buy for $100 or $200 that goes in the back of the racket. Anybody can own it, right? Anybody can own it. Anybody can have data that elite athletes could have had, right? So sport, the technology is making sport accessible to everybody. It's a huge democratization, phase in the business of sports. Second, it is letting everybody enjoy the sport at its highest level. So in fact, in lifeCykul, we have these leagues, we have these cricket leagues and badminton leagues. And, in fact, pre-pandemic, we actually had 1,000 cricket games played on our app. And the experience that people get is no less than what an IPL player, feels and experiences. And Sudhakar, to your point about being a cyclist, just the sheer amount of data that a cyclist can gather and make it available in a moment's notice to the entire world, be it, his or her coach, his or her teammates, or for the self, from a learning purpose, it is just unbelievable. So we are at a revolution point in data in sports and technology in sports, where the computing industry in general was in 60s and 70s. And if you think about it, so 70s is where really the computing as a concept broke out, right? And then in the early 80s, the microprocessors came out, and then suddenly was a huge democratization of the computing industry. Right now, it is democratization of the sports industry thanks to technology. The third and the last example I would give you is on our own app, in lifeCykul, the number of activities that get digitized, the number of data that comes, and then it is used for very, very productive decisions. What is the physical well-being of my employees? What is the mental well-being of my employees? How many of my employees are happy? How many of my employees are burning out? This is the data that you can capture and do something with it. Earlier, it was hard to tell. And why working from office was necessary? Because you still had to, witness with your own eyes what is happening. And you had to walk around, and this is the famous MBWA, right? Management by walking around, and that was needed. Now, no longer. Your walking around is on a screen. Your interaction is on a screen. Your data is coming from places that you couldn't have thought of. So the technology is at a stage. I don't think there has ever been a point in the human history. I'm not just saying India or anywhere. There has never been a point in the human history where technology is going to impact this big an aspect of life, right? So it's a milestone event. It's a landmark event. I mean, I can't emphasize that. But to answer your question as a technologist from my side, I don't think, in fact, we are very fortunate to be living in this era.
I think you've touched upon a lot of impact points, from the users to customers to talent analytics. I think it's come a huge way, and a large number of applications. Thanks a lot. I just hand it back to Professor Sudhakar Rao for the next cluster.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Deenanath, I think this is getting more and more interesting as we actually work past 7:30 p.m. But yes, let's keep pedaling. Let's take the questions. I request you to answer the 2 more clusters that we have. I'm sure while patiently listening to you, like many other observers and participants here today, I have understood that you have a great belief in the new India. The immense possibilities that are emerging out of what's happening right now in India is probably a very, very important takeaway that has attracted you back into India. It started there. And then your views on women, your views on tech, that's pretty interesting. The kind of apps that we use right now for cycling that throw up data in few seconds, and then we have, as a shared community, a small number of people who work along with me or who ride along with me. We text and we understand and we speak what is to be done next. I think I'm very fortunate to say my own personal experience that the team members that we have, one of them is a pro, in the sense, one of them looks like you when you had put up your own picture with that kind of gear, that skin tight kind of gear. They look more like a scuba diver than a cyclist, but they look awesome. They look sexy. That is one. Second is I have a coach who's much younger to me, but he knows how to handle. He does something like wolf training kind of coaching on Indian roads. And one of the points that you mentioned is that the road friction is there. The most unexpected thing that happens is from the unorganized market. I had written about this as well. The unorganized market sense, the unorganized road traffic that we have in India or in Hyderabad, that is the biggest thing. I am not expecting that somebody would actually ride against me on the same lane, so some of those things. But I'm very happy. I'm engaging very well with you and connecting and relating those points with my own personal experience. That's what I was trying to tell you. So my first question from the second cluster is like this. It is often assumed that leaders who get into crisis situations and have achieved success, they get all the fame, they get all the celebration, accolades, and things like that. Is the story only that much, or how far is it true?
Well, my opinion, the world is a mixed bag, right? So it would be wrong to say only this happens or that happens. So I'm sure there are occasions where the wrong guys get the credit, and I'm sure there are occasions where the right guys don't get the credit, right? So and then the large majority lies in between. But going back to inspiring leader and the inspired leader, right? My belief is that, let's say there is a situation to be handled, and a person has taken the position of leadership there, either by being drawn to the possibility of a solution, or all the right reasons, right? It was his or her place to be doing that. It was mandated by the position, the duty, or just the inner call saying, you know what, this looks like a problem I can solve, right? And they jump in, right? Now, there are a very simple way to look at it from my viewpoint is, what is the intent? If the intent was to claim the award at the end, right? I'm sure there's a practical world. Some of them will be successful doing that. Okay, forget the claim for solving a crisis. I think the highest, ranked awards in the world are probably, gone to people who sought them, right? It designed their entire career and life for that sole purpose, and maybe achieve the success, right? But honestly, they're not inspiring to me, at least. So I get inspired by people who couldn't have cared less about the accolades at the end, but we are so immersed into, addressing the situation, solving the problem, and not because they were the saints. It's just the human thing to do. We all have that. We have that child. In fact, a lot of times leaders are like children, and children are like leaders. So you really have a very unadulterated mindset, especially when people have achieved that kind of a success, right? So you go into it happens to me, right? You go look at a beautiful road, you feel like riding. In fact, I go into a stadium. First time I went into Gachibowli Stadium, and I couldn't have imagined that Hyderabad had such a fantastic sports infrastructure. The first time I went into Gachibowli Stadium, it was lush green, grass in the middle, a well laid out track. Now it's actually not in that great a condition, I think, but at least the first time I saw. In fact, me and there were two other guys, they were at least 10, 15 years younger, to me at that time. And then I said, guys, we should run. And we actually ran. The simple desire by seeing, we are not doing it because there are 10,000 people sitting in the stadium and clapping for us, right? There wasn't even a single guy, to look at us. But you get drawn into a situation because either you're motivated by the happiness that you derive out of that activity, or the sense of accomplishment that you derive by addressing, a challenging problem. This is a puzzle solver's mindset, right? You look at the guys who are naturally drawn to solving a puzzle. You see the they see the description of a puzzle. They can't stop themselves from solving it, right? So when those factors are driving people in and they end up being successful and they get the accolades, what is wrong, right? Now, let's say the practical world has a situation where somebody ran away with a prize with starting out with an absolutely wrong set of intention. That's okay. They'll pay the price for it. People will know, the world will know. These days, fifth graders will know, forget others, right? And but the bigger problem that worries me is, and even from my viewpoint, are there people out there who are doing the right thing, drawn by the right intention, but we are not recognizing them? The system is not letting them. So I'm more worried about people who are not getting recognized rather than the people who are getting recognized. You know what? The guys who get recognized by wrong means, one success, two success, third time. There's always this American rule of 3 strikes, right? The baseball rule. So they're out. 3 strikes, they're out. But there are guys, I don't want them, these right guys, not getting the recognition and being out for 3 strikes. That's my view on that.
Fantastic. I think you touched upon 2 very important aspects of a child kind of mindset, and then the puzzle solver's mindset, the unadulterated mind in the first one that actually takes you towards looking at that and very inquisitively trying to address that particular issue, as much as a puzzle solver's natural inclination for looking at the challenges. I think that's a pretty succinctly put response. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Deenanath. What I'll do is I'll now go to the second question asked by one of our participants, and that is, currently, if you have noticed, there is a shortage in coal in India, and there's a shortage of chips. I think these are the 2 things that are talked about. Does it mean that the leadership has failed to actually pass through the COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, in fact, a boss that I worked for a long time ago on Wall Street used to say, correlation is a fascinating, science. A lot of times we come to the conclusion that the price of pork in Europe has gone up because of the shortage of pig iron in Australia. Right? So what more can I say? The macroeconomics is beyond all of us, right? I think, markets will have their role. I think I don't really, and again, I shouldn't even be attempting the answer. I just should tell you that I don't know enough to answer that question. But at the same time, I know enough, with my Wall Street days, that if somebody comes and no matter how convincing it sounds, that the price of pork in Europe has gone up because of the shortage of pig iron in Australia, okay, a little bit more scrutiny will actually lead us to a little bit more examination.
Right. I think we need to do a little more scrutiny to get to the right answer, and that's very well said. Rise in prices of pork is because of the shortage of pig iron in Australia. Yeah, that's very funny, very interesting. I think a lot of participants are going to take away and remember that particular quote. Yeah, thank you very much. So the third question, Mr. Deenanath, is, do you think that the disruptive innovations emanate from disruptive leaderships, as the lower rungs of management tend to follow the leaders, notwithstanding the ideas of the concepts of entrepreneur? So the question is, disruptive leaders come up with disruptive innovations. Any take on that?
No, I agree. Leaders are crazy people. You can't expect, median behavior and extraordinary results. It's absolutely, ingrained in the way of our corporate, reality, right? It's the more risk you take, more rewards you get. Rewards just doesn't mean, more money. It also means the kind of innovations that come out, the kind of business results that come out. So yes, disruption. But then, that's where the key is. How do we do it? How do we minimize the wrong kind of disruption? And how do we take away the right kind of disruption? How do we make that the new norm? So it's an involved, science. But my short answer to that question is absolutely. And if people had average behavior, you'll get average results.
Fantastic take on that. So there's an addendum to that, and that is probably more cliched, but let me also ask that for the benefit of our participants. Is leadership by birth, or it can be nurtured? In the context of what you've answered.
Yeah, I belong to the school that, leaders are made.
Leaders are not born but made. That's
made by themselves.
Made by themselves. Fantastic. So thank you very much, Mr. Deenanath. Now I'll quickly pass it on to Professor Prasad to finish the next cluster, and then we optimize on time as well. But the questions have to be shorter. The answers can be as beautiful as you are giving. So we'll keep enjoying. Over to you, Professor Prasad. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Rao. I think there's a great take in the previous part, this learning orientation versus performance orientation. As we call it, you convert the practical thing into the academic world. That makes a big difference. And I think that's what I could take away as one of the, what you could, in your responses in your previous cluster. So this question is related to sports. So I'll try and, put all the questions in this cluster together so that you get one question. First is this, what is there from sports that we can learn into leadership, into management, with specific, reference to three things. First is teamwork aspect. Second is orientation, focus on a goal. And the third is when you have, factors which are beyond your control. There's a question in the chat box about last mile supply chain bottlenecks. So internal, external kind of thing, locus of control kind of thing. How do you learn from sports in these three dimensions?
Yeah. So, the biggest difference between sports or a sport and business is that a lot of times we make business a made up reality, right? And we believe that this is like a computer game that goes on and on, So we start, okay, we play. If it fails, if my avatar dies in the game, I restart the game, I replay, right? So it's a virtual world, it's a made up world, is how the mind perceives. But there's a lot of benefit to be derived by, relating it to sport, because sport is a moment of truth. You go in there, it plays out, you got one shot at doing things as an individual, as a team, and you reap the reward or you pay the price of how you have executed on the field. Now, that is the key. Now, with the biggest issue that India faces, right, is the lack of focus on execution. You see so many people sitting in the conference room and doing, armchair philosophy. Who is out there actually making business results happen, right? And if I may recommend, an all-time classic, execution book by Larry Bossidy and Ram Charan. Please, make sure, you have a session on that from anybody. You let people read it. The only thing that is standing between India and the next $1 trillion of the GDP is the art of execution. And that is and what sports teaches us, and back to your question, what is the difference is sport is execution. You don't find a guy, right? And let's take the most common sport in India, on a cricket fielder with arms folded, and standing at a crucial spot in the field and let the ball pass. You don't find that. If you find that, you'll throw that guy out, right? But in business, in offices, you find them, dime a dozen. And that is our problem.
I think you've given a wonderful reference book, and I completely agree with that. If there's been one book which has been on the top of the shelf, it has been Execution by Larry Bossidy and Ram Charan. And you've made a great recommendation to all the audience members. There are many academics in this. I think finally, even academics does not deliver if there is no execution. When you say academics or you talk about learning, finally it is execution. It is a series of steps crafted well so that there is learning and not teaching. So I think that's a wonderful takeaway. I hand it back to Professor Sudhakar Rao for the last cluster.
Fantastic. When I was first reading Ram Charan and Larry Bossidy on the execution or the art of execution, I prepared a presentation and we ran that through various teams, and then I really reveled actually in that, how it connects the people to process to strategy. And it's an amazing book. As you have said it, we will have that session definitely. And none other than Mr. Ram Charan himself should deliver that. We will keep trying for him. His time is very, very precious and premium.
Easier to get Larry Bossidy.
It's easier to get Larry Bossidy. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. That's a good suggestion. But fantastic book, I must tell you. I think several summaries would have been made on that, and several reviews would have been made on that around the world. That's an amazing book. And more importantly, the fact that what stands between India and that $5 trillion economy is execution. I think that's a very profound statement and a piece of advice. I have one question from the next cluster. This is about careers and those students who are trying to build their careers, what they are interested in. Entrepreneurs like you're an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs like you face many challenges in many areas of business, and more importantly, in the areas of finance and also marketing. What are the key issues which you suggest that the students need to be aware of in this context before actually they go there onto the ground?
The very simple answer is, of course, the entrepreneurs everywhere face challenges, not just in India or anywhere. The bigger problem that we face in India is our regulatory framework, and we end up barking up the wrong tree, right? So we look at the politicians and say, you guys are not doing enough. But India has had this, an infrastructure of, regulatory framework other than the politicians, or in addition to politicians. That is a deeply vested, system in the old ways of doing things, and that no, school or college is teaching that in India. Compliance is a big issue here. Taxation is a big issue here. Ease of doing business is a big issue here. We have fundamental problems in the way we have set up the business foundation, or the foundation for startup. It is difficult to start a business here. It's difficult to close a business here, right? So it's even more difficult to close a business than to start a business. So there are things that, when I, as an entrepreneur, right, what is on the top of my mind is my product, my idea. But in the end, in terms of what, amount of time that we end up spending, is you'll end up seeing that your product and your idea, while, as hard as it is to get it done, it is still your smallest of the problems compared to these other, deep-rooted, old world problems that, we were stupid enough to live with them during the British times. We were even more stupid to borrow them into our times. And as if that was not the limit on stupidity, we are continuing them, till today. And honestly, I don't blame, the well-meaning politicians either, because the system is so deeply entrenched that for a few people to change that in a short order, it's next to impossible. So we just have to, the biggest, request I have for the up and coming entrepreneurs, with the academic institutes like yourself, with the people who have now been in the system for a while, is to take on that challenge. Target those guys. That is a headwind that you're not seeing. You're seeing the road friction, right? It's the usual entrepreneurial ecosystem that everybody will go through, no matter which. You're seeing that mountain up there, right? You have to do your fundraise, you have to get your things done. That's a mountain that is visible. The invisible headwind is that environment, the regulatory ecosystem that we have in this country, that makes it hard for everyone. Let me tell you this though, and I'll give you a sport analogy here. So one of the, the greatest the American football coach, he won the first Super Bowl for his team, and somebody went and asked one of the players who played underneath him, hey, we heard he's a very tough coach, and what do you say about him? He said, no, that guy is actually a very fair guy. He treats everyone like crap. Okay, so and that's the problem in India. They treat every single business like as if it is run by crooks, and that's and the other side being the biggest crooks themselves, right? So we have that problem, and I think my biggest advice or request, if I may say, to anybody who's getting into any kind of business. I mean, a startup is going to be the biggest part of our business very soon anyway. The entrepreneurs are going to be the biggest drivers of this economy very soon anyway. It's only a question of 5 to 10 years. And as we do that, if we don't have a thread going and saying, every single year we make some incremental progress towards solving that problem, right? We will have a very big hurdle to our growth.
Fantastic, Mr. Deenanath. I think there are several takeaways for academics, several takeaways for even the students. See, the two words that you have mentioned is one in terms of the business environment. A large part of it is a result of the regulatory framework, which is a result of the incapacitated thinking of some of the leaders that govern us. Yes, that is one side. The other side of the world that you mentioned is about the educational institutions, business schools who have not built the foundation for entrepreneurship well, and they have not thought about, teaching the young kids to worry about the headwinds that they are going to face in terms of the examples that you have given. I'm quoting them, like compliance or taxation or many other things that usually are not done. But very quickly, with your permission, what I'll do is I will switch it to Professor Prasad. He has architected the recent online MBA program. That's a new age program that we have done. If you have any response quickly on that, Professor Prasad will take that, and then I'll conclude. And then as the clock strikes 8 p.m., we will also probably wind it up at that time. Professor Prasad.
I completely agree with Mr. Deenanath that entrepreneurship is going to be the pivotal point for India. And there are enough reports which have studied this, which say that there is huge potential for India to be an entrepreneurial nation. I mean, it has been. In fact, if you look at the ratings, the only thing is that they are all small-sized entrepreneurs, 1, 2, 3 people kind of business. It's not that it is there. It's in the blood. But for that to turn into organized as well as using of technology, I think this is the right moment. And to that extent, what we have tried to do is we have tried to put that entrepreneurship practicum, which is one of our courses, as the center point of the entire program. And that starts with, first of all, trying to studying the environment. I mean, even before you look at the customer per se, I mean, with reference to the customer or the product, you first need to look around you and see what is it which is happening, why it is happening. So there are certain products which do well, and there are reasons for that. I mean, it's not your product, but somebody else's product. So in your first year of MBA, you need to start by looking outside, and you need to study. If you want to get into a certain sector, you need to study the whole environment which is there around that with respect to that product, and then see what the pain points are. I mean, if you're able to start your study there, by the time you hit your second year, you have some good ideas. And there are different, all those functions that you normally teach in MBA, they'll all come in there. No doubt they'll come in there. But it will give you the base to focus on where you should study. And that is very, very important for an MBA, because, otherwise you just go through the whole thing and then finally you land up and you really study there. But if you start with your kind of a 2-year, you have that advantage with you, and you put that entire idea to operation during that, many of these questions can be answered. I think particularly the one with respect to the headwinds can be answered there. I think this is my quick response to the question.
Great. Thank you, Professor Prasad. I think, Mr. Deenanath, we have had a fantastic session today in terms of the startling takeaways that we have. Sports is about moments of truth, and there is no room for armchair analysts over there. I think that tells it all. It's about execution, and it's about results, and everyone is judged right there on Maidan. So that's pretty good. Leadership is nothing but a solo ride, and it is against the headwinds all the time, most of the time. And leadership is an individual process of evolution, realizing and putting together your abilities and competence. But in the end, it is for pulling up others and being there till it is achieved. And each leader has their individual stamp on what they have achieved or what they have tried. I think these are fantastic lessons for us. I couldn't have asked for something better than this. And I'm amazingly happy, I'm sure, along with all the participants today. It is a true, in true sense, it is Vijayadashmi, it is a Dasara, or it's a festive kind of session that we have had. I want to thank you on behalf of the entire ICFAI group, and on behalf of all the participants, and on behalf of Professor Prasad, for sparing your time and sharing these wonderful insights. We are going to make a nice summary of the entire session, and I'll share that summary with you. And we actually put it up on archives. We have a video recorded session, as well as we have an entire text form of the summary of the discussion, very nicely structured, and it is handled by very, very senior prof with us. He's Dr. Ved Purishwa. He does that. And all those summaries are already there on our archives page. So this is going to be there. And we have raised most of the questions that are put together by our participants. And we're very happy for having gone through your responses. It's quite fulfilling and satisfying. Thank you very much, sir, for this wonderful session once again. Thank you. And I wish you and your family and everyone around also and their families a very happy Dashara. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and Happy Dasara to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to meet again on the next Friday at 6:30 p.m. It is going to be the 27th webinar. And on the 27th webinar, we are going to talk about healthcare and some kind of leadership that's possible. And we are going to bring in a guest. His name is Vikram Vuppala. He is the founder and CEO of Nephroplus, who has set up about 250 dialysis centers across the country. He is much bigger than any single hospital. And we are going to learn some of the best lessons in leadership and entrepreneurship from Mr. Vikram Vuppala. Stay tuned, 6:30 p.m., October 22nd. We will all be very happy to see you again. Till then, celebrate your festival, and more festivals are going to come. But as Professor Prasad said, we are supposed to be wiser on festive holidays or festivals, and not give any break for these sessions. So we will continue the sessions irrespective of the holiday or a festival, and we will be with you. We are enjoying this as much as you are. See you again on the next Friday at 6:30 p.m. Thank you all.